The New Orleans Saints get a positive health update thanks to newly signed tight end Foster Moreau, which could be one of the biggest game changers for the New Orleans Saints in 2023. We got all of that and a little bit of land yap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget you can subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss a daily episode. And if you want to keep the conversation going on with me one-on-one, you want to take part in our exclusive Q&As, or get involved in our film studies, you can do so over at joinsubtext.com/lockedonsaints. As always, I am your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media. You can find me as the senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site covering the New Orleans Saints. You can also find me on Tuesdays over on the Locked On NFL podcast and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And then some as well. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster and for free. Post your job for free today over at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, I'm going to give you one thing that I would change about this New Orleans Saints team roster, or not organization, but one thing I'd change about the New Orleans Saints going into 2023. But before we get to that, I want to take a look at the newest addition that I think could have a surprise impact in 2023. And for me, that's wide receiver Bryan Edwards. I'll get to the why here in a little bit and why I didn't choose some of the other guys that are also good choices and obvious choices. But I want to start off here with great news around New Orleans Saints tight end Foster Moreau. My plan was to come in here today and kind of do questions and things like that. But this news broke and I knew I wanted to lead today's episode with it. New Orleans Saints tight end Foster Moreau making the announcement on Twitter on Monday, for those of you that haven't reached your rate limit yet, I guess, saying that he is now in full remission after his Hodgkin's lymphoma diagnosis. And it's just incredible news. And it could be game-changing news for the New Orleans Saints. This is a guy that had over 30 catches, 420 yards, and a pair of touchdowns last year at tight end with the Las Vegas Raiders, with Derek Carr at quarterback, who's, of course, now the New Orleans Saints quarterback. The Saints brought him in after the departure, of Adam Troutman, who they traded away during the NFL draft to the Denver Broncos. And now Foster Moreau pairs up with Juwan Johnson, who brought in, 508 receiving yards and a whopping 7 touchdowns, most of which during the stretch run of the New Orleans Saints season at the end of the year. Now there's a lot of anticipation around what this tandem, this duo might be able to do, no pun intended, for the New Orleans Saints at the position, at tight end. And now I think this just adds another layer to the excitement around the two. This has been a wild timeline for Foster Moreau, if you think about it, right? He visited the New Orleans Saints in March during the physical. He found out that he had Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was a positive diagnosis that came through. One of the many situations since 2017 that we know of. There might be more in which the New Orleans Saints have found something that could be life-threatening, life-concerning. You think about Nick Fairley, John Dornbos, and others. Now you add Foster Moreau to that list, and it had to be a whirlwind for him. But what was the first thing that he did was that he vowed that he would return to the game of football, what was going to take as much time as he needed away to be able to deal with that. The Hodgkin's lymphoma diagnosis, he revealed via Good Morning America in a conversation with Michael Strahan, former NFL great, that he was in stage 2, which means that the lymphoma, the cancer had spread from the original, I don't want to say destination, original location and everything. But he felt confident they were going to be able to control it. Gave another positive update on the Adam Schefter podcast. And then all of a sudden, come April, May, he signs with the New Orleans Saints one day after being cleared. I think the way that he explained it during his introductory press conference with us, which happened after he had that surprise, showing, surprise presence at the first day of OTAs for the New Orleans Saints. He said that he expects this to be a lifelong battle, and him going into full remission does not mean, if I understand correctly, I was reading up on the Cancer Society, the American Cancer Society website, the way that like remission works. I'm not a doctor, y'all, I'm sorry. But the way that remission works is that basically if you're in complete remission, there's like complete and partial, but complete remission, which sounds like what he's identifying in full remission, is that you're asymptomatic, basically. You don't have any symptoms and they can't find the cancer cells, but recurrence can still happen. So there's still, it's not cured. It's just remission. So he's like free and clear for now, but there will be continued checkups and things like that. So yeah, it is a lifelong battle, but for right now, he's winning. And that's awesome. Like, that's so freaking cool just to see the journey for Foster Moreau throughout the season. I mean, I get passionate about things on this show all the time, and I get hype about things on the show. Like, I'm an energetic person. Sometimes that just comes out, but this is one of those stories that is just too good to miss and too good not to revel in, especially when you're celebrating someone else's life in the process. Like, it's just really cool. It's just really cool. So, you look at Foster Moreau, he gets the opportunity to come back. One of the other things that he mentioned during that time is that, it was the way that, the cancer was reacting in certain cells and other sciencey things that I don't fully understand, is that he was able to undergo a certain treatment that didn't require things like chemo and stuff like that. He said that his quality of life was not impacted. His mental health, of course, was impacted, which of course it's going to be, and that his physical ability to play the game would neither be impacted by the treatment nor the cancer itself. And so he started to be out on the football field, and he quickly was out on the football field. And now we expect to see him at training camp. We expect to see him week 1. But just incredible news for Foster Moreau, and incredible news for the New Orleans Saints, who did a really cool thing too by making sure that they still extended him the contract. Dennis Allen mentioned that even after the diagnosis, he was very clear with Foster and his representation that that they still wanted him. Like, hey, once you're good, let us know. Like, we're here. Like, kind of is the way that they played it. And I just think that that's really cool. And it was kind of neat of Foster to still sign with the Saints too, right? Like, this is his hometown. I didn't even mention the hometown factor, the Jesuit high school factor, like all that other stuff. But, it's just an awesome story altogether. So really, really cool stuff. The Saints now go in with a completely rebuilt tight end room that could have a major impact, especially with a guy like Derek Carr at quarterback who loves his tight ends. And now the tight end that he's loved for the past 3 or 4 years is now here in New Orleans, ready to go in full remission. And what an incredible story. The New Orleans Saints are going to look for impact from Foster Moreau, Juwan Johnson, and the other tight ends. But there are some players out there that are also new additions that could have surprise impacts in 2023. And one of the guys at the top of my list, besides some of the obvious ones, which we'll also discuss in the next segment, is wide receiver Bryan Edwards, who also has a lot of familiarity with Derek Carr. Let's talk about how he could potentially impact the New Orleans Saints in 2023 in a bit of an unexpected manner. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs is the place to go if you're looking for a job, but also a fantastic place to go if you're looking to hire as well, especially with the way that new potential hires these days can be very high stakes, especially if you're a small business. You want to make sure you're getting the people that have the right information, or not information, but kind of like the right requirements that fit the culture, all of these other things, right? They're high stakes hires, and LinkedIn Jobs helps you get to the right people for your team faster and for free. You can use simple tools like screening questions. They have the hashtag hiring purple profile picture frame that you can use to help spread the word. And then of course, LinkedIn Jobs is rated #1 in delivering quality hires versus their leading candidates. So if you want to check them out today, you know that LinkedIn Jobs is going to help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Appreciate all the everydayers out there making us your first listen of the day every day. Tomorrow, midweek fundamentals. We're going to go through a bit of the wide receiver route tree. And a big part of the reason why I want to go through that is because we're going to be discussing Bryan Edwards, excuse my faulty alliteration, articulation, in today's episode, because I think that Bryan Edwards could have a surprise impact in the 2023 season. And what I mean by that is that he's a guy that maybe gets thrust into a little bit of a role that's bigger than we anticipated, whether because he earns it or because he earns it and a spot opens up, right? Like there's a couple of different things. Like you have to earn it if you want to make the 53-man roster, period. And for the New Orleans Saints, they have 3 top receivers. Michael Thomas, who we believe is going to be healthy to start the season. The big question is, will he be healthy throughout the season? And I think that's one that he's ready and raring to prove one way or another. Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed, of course, are your top 3 guys. We broke down Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave in yesterday's episode as the 2 second-year sophomore players that are ready to step into stardom. So why would Bryan Edwards be the guy that I pick that will have the major impact in 2023? And I think the reason why I pick him is because I think he's a little bit more versatile than a lot of people recognize. And of course, he has the communication and familiarity with his quarterback in Derek Carr, who of course was his quarterback 2020, 2021 during his time with the Las Vegas Raiders. And I think one of the things that makes Bryan Edwards such an intriguing addition for me. Oh, well, actually, before I get into that, let me say this. There are other really good answers. Like Derek Carr, Jamal Williams, these are guys that might have the biggest impact, but they don't have the surprise impact. If they have a good impact, you expect a good impact from them. So I wouldn't call those surprise impacts. Then there are other guys that absolutely could have surprise impacts. DeMarco Jackson, but yeah, he's not really a new addition. He's just a new face to the potential lineup. But you think about some of the other new additions, like a Shaquan Davis, who's an undrafted free agent wide receiver out of South Carolina State, 6'4", 216 pounds, deep threat, big guy, all those other things. But he's got a lot to do and to prove before he makes the roster. Can you help on special teams? Can you perform in the slot? Which he has taken. He took over 180 snaps in the slot last year, over 200 snaps in the slot with South Carolina State the year before that. So the opportunity's there, but probably the guy with the NFL experience has a little bit of a lead to make the roster. The other guys, that you look at are the rookies and things like that, which I don't think are guys that have unexpected impacts, but they're easier choices as well. So all of those are also good answers and beyond, right? Nick Saldiveri could be a guy that has a surprise impact if he steals the starting left guard position at any point and stuff like that. But the reason why I go with Bryan Edwards is because, look, I haven't talked about him very much, so I'd like to get you a little bit more exposure to him, especially we're going to break down his route tree here in a second. But the other piece of it is that there's 2 ways that he could have a major impact, and both of them are important to the New Orleans Saints. The first of which, and kind of the biggest opportunity for impact, is if Michael Thomas gets injured. Michael Thomas at 6'3", 200 plus pounds. You've got Bryan Edwards, who's also at 6'3", 200 plus pounds, who runs I don't want to say runs a similar route tree, because you have Michael Thomas, who's like one of the best route runners in the NFL. Bryan Edwards is not as polished a route runner as Michael Thomas, but he has played the X receiver role, the weak side split end receiver role throughout his career. And so he's used to lining up out wide. He's used to being the go-to guy in the offense, the guy that, is the number 1 receiver and things like that. Like he's played that role before, which I think is of value. So I think that he could step in there to keep Chris Olave in his expansive role, keep Rashid Shaheed in his expansive role without having to have them be the guys that are running like the slants and outs and cuts and things like that. But I want to also mention that he's got a pretty expansive route tree. And he also took over 150 snaps from the slot last season, over 180 if you're looking at Pro Football Focus. And so he has a little bit of versatility to work. And I'm talking, he had like 70 plus on the left side and 70 plus on the right side. So he's got the versatility on either side of the field. Spent about 47% of his, and not last year, sorry, in 2021, because last year he didn't really play much. Also spent 47% of his snaps playing at left wide receiver on the wide, 29 over on the right side. So there's a lot of expansiveness in terms of the way that he's been utilized throughout his career. And that was, of course, him working with Derek Carr as well. So you like to see, you could project that there will be a little bit of familiarity in terms of what his role would be in New Orleans with Derek Carr at quarterback here. But the other thing is that you look at his route distribution. 98 go routes during his time in 2021 over the course of 20 games, because they played in a wild card game as well. You've also got, so what would that be? 18 games. He's played in a wild card game as well. Ran 28 up the seam as well. So he's got the verticality in his route distribution. But listen to this: corner route 34, out route 41, hitch 38. And by the way, these numbers mean the number of times that he ran these routes. Sorry. Digs 59, post 39, slant 31. So and then again seam at 28. So he ran a very, very diverse route tree during that 2021 season. And I think that can translate here in New Orleans, and especially with him having sort of that experience of playing in the slot. And if I narrow this down and just look at the plays that he ran in the slot, listen to the route distribution here. 7 go routes. So the deep routes for him have very much been toward the outside, kind of, because he also ran 24 routes from the slot up the seam. So he had a lot of verticality still coming out of the slot, but he also ran 13 over routes, 16 corner routes, 15 out routes, 11 drags from the slot. So really diverse route tree again, 9 digs. So there's a lot of diversity in terms of what he's able to do both on the outside and on the inside. And I do think that some of that can translate for the New Orleans Saints. So it just gives you a little bit of an idea about like how a guy like Bryan Edwards could potentially fit in for the New Orleans Saints and have a bit of unexpected impact if he is called upon. If he doesn't get called upon, then of course he's not going to have the unexpected impact. And that might be good for New Orleans, right? Because the biggest thing for them is keeping Michael Thomas healthy. But if you look back at 2017, 2018, or excuse me, 2015, 2016, 2017, all those years, 4 or 5 different receivers with more than 300 receiving yards. You look at the most recent years, 2020 as well as 2021, and those numbers are down to 4. And so you don't see a lot of that distribution, right? You think about Drew Brees and all the receivers that he would throw to when, during a game, he would have 10 different receivers with receptions or 8 different receivers with receptions or whatever, or pass catchers, not just receivers. Sorry, they decided at 7 p.m. that this is the time that they were going to trim the lawn. I'm moving into a house August 1st, and I'm very grateful for that. So if you hear a little bit of background noise, I apologize. But I do think that there is something here to where Bryan Edwards does have a little bit of, not really a little bit, but he definitely has a door that can be open that would allow him to have an unexpected impact here in 2023. Maybe other guys have greater opportunities, but we've spoken about those other guys. Let's look at Bryan Edwards. That's what I wanted to do today, and I think we did a good job of that. Tomorrow, we'll take a look a little bit more at the route tree and kind of like what some of these things mean, in-breaking versus out-breaking, all that other stuff. But coming up next, I want to take a look at the one thing that I'd change about the New Orleans Saints going into 2023. Got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with our final segment of the day. What is the one thing that I would change about the New Orleans Saints going into 2023? And listen, I know the one thing that I would change about the New Orleans Saints going into 2023, but it could be the wrong decision. But I'll break that down. I'll break that down in a second. I'll tell you the one thing that I would change. I think I would have entered the bloody waters of the offensive coordinator search if I were the New Orleans Saints in 2023. Pete Carmichael is a fantastic person. I want to see Sneaky Pete. I want to see Pete the Drip Carmichael. I want to see the hat backwards on Pete Carmichael this year. That would be dope. Don't get me wrong. And like, what a cool redemption story or bounce back story he can be, especially with the offense maybe looking a little bit more familiar to what he's used to calling plays with Drew Brees and things like that, with having Derek Carr in the building. Not that Derek Carr is Drew Brees, but he's closer to that style of quarterback than Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton are. So when I look at where the reason why I would go into those bloody waters, and the reason why I mentioned bloody waters is that there were like 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 different teams, nearly half the league, looking for new offensive coordinators over the course of this offseason. And most of those teams had quarterbacks at the ready. The New Orleans Saints at the time did not. They didn't sign Derek Carr until just before free agency officially opened up after he was released by the Las Vegas Raiders. And they would have had to have sort of solidified the offensive coordinator search much earlier than that. So it would have been tough. It would have been challenging. That's why I say it could have been the wrong decision. And I understand why the Saints didn't want to undergo that. They had nothing to offer. They had nothing to offer. I mean, the best thing that they had to offer was Andy Dalton and maybe Jameis Winston, because no one was sure that Jameis was even going to stay in New Orleans after the way that everything went in 2022. Now, he surprised everyone after Derek Carr signed and still stayed in New Orleans, took the big pay cut, all those other things. And he explained why on his, Instagram account and all that other stuff. But the Saints didn't really have a lot to pitch. I mean, they had good weapons, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed. But if you think about Derek Carr being the reason that Michael Thomas stuck around, if they didn't get Derek Carr, Michael Thomas might not have stuck around, and there's no way to project that if you're an offensive coordinator signing on with the team. Dennis Allen, Mickey Loomis, the New Orleans Saints could have done all the pitches that they could have and said, look, this is our plan. We want to get Derek Carr. We're going to find a way to do it. We're going to get it done. And then because of that, Michael Thomas is going to stay, and then we're going to move forward. We're going to blah, blah, blah. They could have laid all that out. We're going to draft, we're going to sign Jamal Williams. They're going to draft, Kendre Miller. Like, they could have laid out a whole plan in terms of like, here's what we hope happens. But there wasn't really a lot that they could have solidified. But I kind of still would have taken the risk. And I think a part of that is that this New Orleans Saints offense, if it doesn't work this year, it's going to be a big-time missed opportunity. Big-time missed opportunity. And the only way that it's going to work this year is if the things that didn't work last year work this year. So we get to the definition of insanity, right? The idea of like doing the same thing and expecting different results. This isn't entirely the same thing, but it's close to the same thing. It's still a little bit of trying to maintain status quo in terms of what the New Orleans Saints still want their Peyton-like offense to look like here in 2023. So how much will they change it? How much will they address it? How much will they update it? How much will they mix in? How many more screens will we see? What are all the things they're going to do to diversify it? Will we see more motion? I get it. There's a lot of different ways for the Saints offense to evolve. And so I would even go so far as to say the Saints needed to come back with a different offensive coordinator, even if it is Pete Carmichael, but a different Pete Carmichael. We've had that conversation here on the show before. So this could still happen. The Saints could still enter 2023 with a different offensive coordinator, big time air quotes, with Pete Carmichael still being the name, but things just looking a lot different. It being a different Pete Carmichael, it being a different offense, it being a different play calling style. So they still could come through and say, hey, look, we didn't enter the bloody waters of the search for a new offensive coordinator because, Pete, you got to get this right in 2023. And therefore, it leads to change no matter what. Could be the way to go. But you think about some of these guys that, Liam Cohen going back to Kentucky, could you have potentially brought him in? That's a guy the Saints reportedly rumor has it, not really reportedly, rumor has it was interested in last year. Actually, I'd go so far to say as reported. I'd go so far to say reportedly. I think Nick said that too. And so, there was that. Of course, there's always going to be the Eric Bieniemy question, right? The Saints spent hours and hours and hours with Eric Bieniemy in a head coaching interview just last year before they did the thing that we knew they were going to do in appointing or hiring or promoting, rather. That's what I was looking for. Dennis Allen to head coach from defensive coordinator. Could he have been a guy that you go back to and say, hey, come and be an offensive coordinator, come be a play caller and everything? Because look what he signed on with the Washington Commanders. I mean, Sam Howell? Was that really the thing that the Washington Commanders went to him and said, here, look, we've got a shiny Sam Howell. I mean, if you could sell that, then certainly you can sell, hey, we might have Derek Carr. Certainly, right? And so I might have entered that search. I might have rolled the dice. I understand the caution behind not doing it. Like, what's the chance? What's the percentage chance that you're going to walk away with, a worse play caller or walk away with an unproven play caller, which we have to admit that Pete Carmichael is proven as an offensive coordinator in the NFL. He's a good architect. He's a good installer. We've seen him, command and play call for some of the best offenses in the NFL, 2011, 2012. But, he had a Drew Brees that helped with all that. But could Derek Carr be the guy that helps with all that? So I don't know. I just feel like that's probably a risk I would have taken. I would have taken going in there and seeing if you can find that new next defensive coordinator. Now, look, I suppose it's possible that there were conversations that happened and things like that. And maybe there were potential OCs out there that were kind of like, you don't really have enough, right? Because again, they didn't have the quarterback. You weren't sure you were going to have the top wide receiver, the guy that, if healthy, projects to be your top wide receiver and all those other things. But man, you had a really good defense, and man, you had a plan, And so I kind of feel like I would have gone down that rabbit hole. But there's a reason why I'm not the general manager of an organization. It's the reason why I'm not an owner of an organization. I just stream into a microphone for 30 minutes and hope that I entertain you. So let me know, like, what's the one thing that you would change about the New Orleans Saints going into 2023? I would take this risk, but maybe you'd be more calculated, or maybe you take the same risk, or maybe there's a different risk that you would have taken. So let me know what you think, but that's where I'd go. I probably would have at least entertained the idea to the point of like making the leap and jumping into the red waters of the offensive coordinator search in this year's NFL. But I hope Pete Carmichael just is the next offensive. Like, he is the guy. Like, he does curb it. He does turn it around and all this other stuff. Because again, what a great story that would be going into 2023 or coming out of 2023. So thanks again, everybody, for making Locked On Saints, all you everydayers, your first listen of the day, every day. Happy 4th of July. If you're out, please be safe. And as always, I appreciate you so much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi, especially out at that 4th of July celebration. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter. What else have I got now? Spoutable. I've got Blue Sky now. We've got Instagram. You can find me on all those platforms at Ross Jackson Nola, Nola. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.